come on, make a move. Everybody say it, make a move.
Sometimes I try to link these segments up with appropriate days or dates. Like President's Day, there's a lot of them. Secretary's Day, Administrative Professionals Day, Personal Trainer's Day, things like that. And I looked, and there is no National Lobbyist Day. Weird. People are concerned about the cozy relationship between government and business. They believe that business, through their contributions to politicians, unduly influence elections and policies. They're correct. This is one of the unintended consequences of the regulation-driven society we live in today. People think that regulations are necessary to keep businesses from misbehaving. In this, they are mistaken. The market and legal liability keep businesses from misbehaving much more effectively than regulation. The main thing that regulation does is give competitive advantage to some businesses over others, and to give businesses control over politicians. Let's take Amazon, please. Amazon decided to raise its company minimum wage to $15 an hour. The main reason it did this was it was having difficulty attracting employees capable of performing the tasks that they needed them to perform. It was already paying substantially above the federal minimum wage, but this was not enough to attract and keep them. Wages needed to be increased so that Amazon could continue to succeed. Now, after this move, what is the very first thing Amazon did? Amazon sent an army of lobbyists to Washington, D.C. to try to get the government to require a $15 an hour minimum wage for every company in the country. It did this for one reason and one reason only: to stifle competition. Specifically, to make sure that its main competitor, Walmart, would be forced to increase its costs and therefore be at a disadvantage in its dealings with Amazon. Now, Walmart's business model is substantially different from Amazon's. Walmart operates brick and mortar stores in many small towns across the country. In addition, Walmart has started competing with Amazon for its online customers, and Amazon sees this correctly as a threat. A $15 an hour minimum wage would deliver a heavy blow to Walmart's ability to compete with Amazon. Many of the small towns where Walmart operates can't support a $15 an hour minimum wage. It would drive prices up to the point that they would no longer be a serious competitor to Amazon. Why should we care? Well, do you remember back in the 90s, I think, when people were freaking out that Microsoft was a monopoly that was going to take over the world? You know the reason that didn't happen? Lack of regulation. Google and others started invading Microsoft's territory, providing better services for cheaper prices. In other words, doing what competitors in the business world are supposed to do. People are now freaking out about Google. The best thing we could do to increase Google's influence would be to regulate them. Now, this seems boring and pedestrian, and I can understand why. I think the fact that this kind of information is boring is one of the problems we have in organizing our societies correctly. But this dynamic is not just some dull, esoteric occurrence. This dynamic is what makes products better, produces more jobs, drives wages up, creates better medical care, invents better drugs, and makes a more healthy and successful society. The lack of this dynamic is why we now have about 100,000 lobbyists operating in the United States. You can disregard the official number of, I think, 12,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. These folks have gotten very good at lobbying without fitting the technical description of a lobbyist. So let me describe a typical scene in a congressional office in Washington, D.C. Lobbyist Smith makes an appointment with Congressman Jones to discuss a new regulation that would affect her client's industry. Lobbyist Smith wants to change the language in this regulation to favor her clients. Lobbyist Smith indirectly promises to do certain favors for Congressman Jones if the language in the legislation is written in a way that her client can get a competitive advantage. So the question is, what if this bill and similar legislation did not exist? And there was nothing that Congressman Jones could do for Lobbyist Smith. There's an easy answer to that. Lobbyist Smith would not be there. In fact, Lobbyist Smith would not have a job. If this dynamic was the rule rather than the exception, lobbyist Smith would not be a lobbyist. She would be out in the marketplace in a job that was adding value rather than subtracting it. By giving politicians power over corporations, we are giving corporations power over politicians. The only way to take away corporations' power over politicians is to take away politicians' power over corporations. You can try to regulate the lobbying industry until your heart's content. It'll only make things worse. Like the Hydra from Greek legend, when you cut off one lobbyist's head, two will grow in its place. Now, by no means am I suggesting that we cut off the head of every lobbyist in Washington, D.C., as tempting as that might be. But once again, these people are responding to the incentive system that has been set before them. If you or I were in this position, you could expect no different behavior. Once again, these issues are difficult because they're counterintuitive. Concerned that business will misbehave, make rules that they have to follow. Concerned that corporations have too much control over politicians, make more rules that the businesses must follow. Concerned that politicians are too influenced by businesses, you guessed it, make even more rules. This is a logical and philosophical dead end. The societies where special interests have the greatest influence are also the societies that have the most extensive and complex regulations. Get rid of the regulations and you get rid of the influence. Get rid of the influence and you get rid of the lobbyists. Get rid of the lobbyists and I think we can all agree we'd be a lot better off. Except if we could get rid of the lawyers too.